All right, welcome to Food for Thought, my friends. I am Gideon Mazembe, and this episode is just like any other episode where we just food for thought. It's not necessarily telling you what to do or how to do it. It's just presenting something forth based on my philosophy and other conversations. So today's topic, food for thought, is rebuilding yourself from setbacks. I will be joined on a phone call by a friend, but before we get to that point, I just wanted to discuss, what it looks like when you go through a setback and my steps that I took into rebuilding myself from a setback, and it's very important before I get into it to understand that a setback doesn't necessarily mean you're failed. Often a setback is something that hinders your ability to continually and progressively move towards a direction of your understanding, whether it means that one of the examples I like to use is your ongoing ability to save towards buying a car, and eventually you've been hit with some bills and that progressiveness has been hindered. Or when you've invested yourself in a relationship and then suddenly you realize, an affair has taken place and, there's a bit of a setback in that progress. So that's what setback really means. It's really that disturbance in progressiveness. So you're not to be defined when circumstances take place. It's a great opportunity for you to sit, reevaluate, reflect, and then continue or, resume the journey. But talking about rebuilding from setbacks, I've got 3 steps that I took in rebuilding myself from setbacks. I think it's probably first best to give a bit of a testimony, share a bit of a story with you. One of my many setbacks is it takes place with my journey, to trying to be a professional rugby player, rugby league to be specific. For my journey with football, first, I probably should share that with you. It began at a young age. Football for me was a sport that was more than a sport. It was a barrier breaker. Being that I was a migrant to Australia, I didn't quite speak English. My only introduction to people was, hello, my name is Gideon, and so there was a barrier when it came to trying to make friends. But the common denominator that allowed me to break that barrier was football. And so football, I became so grossly attached to this game that it allowed me to make friends. It allowed me to, find a way to communicate with other kids and hang around them long enough so that I could adapt and learn how they communicated. And what's more, it introduced me to elements of travel, sleeping over with people. I made some representative teams and, went interstate, international, and, it was very rewarding. But what I found was, as life went on with this sport, from primary school to high school, receiving a sporting scholarship and then being celebrated, I found myself really closely attached to this game, so much so that I identified who I was in success of the sport, if you will. As the journey continued, made more friends, traveled more, made more representative teams, my state, the national teams. I graduated from high school. My grades weren't exactly the best, but I still had football. And then, the greatest opportunity presented itself. I was offered a professional contract to, a rugby league club, Brisbane Broncos, if you will. And so I was given a 3-year contract. I was given 3 years to prove my worth, and I accepted the challenge, as you do. By this stage, I really identified myself as a rugby league player. I didn't see myself as anything else other than just purely rugby league. Everything I did, everything I spoke about, it was just rugby league because this is who I was. Now, I had 3 years to fulfill this opportunity to becoming, a superstar that I saw myself being. But after the 3rd year, I was let go. The club, all of a sudden, overnight, decided they're moving on and I wasn't part of the plan. Now, what took place after this was the greatest downfall of my being. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where to go. Some friends I lost along the way. I had no sense of, self-worth, self-validation. I had no values, no boundaries. I was just an anything and everything for whatever. And I really lost myself because the one thing that I identified myself with from a young age till, my early 20s was stripped just like that away from me. And it's a painful experience, but one that required a great deal of rebuilding. I didn't have any qualifications, no degree, no business ventures, nothing. My bank account went down to zero. I was back living with mum, went through a breakup. Just the whole world just came crumbling beneath my feet. Now, the rebuilding stage was one of a long one, and it took a lot of trial and error. I was dealing with substance abuse and all these other elements, self-worth at an all-time low. It was just an ugly place, a dark place to be. But, the 3 steps of rebuilding that I want to share with you is my personal experience, and I think it's exactly what got me to where I am today, running a business, becoming, a motivational speaker, running workshops for corporate companies, doing national tours for theater plays, being, in feature films for TV shows and movies. Coming from a dark place where I didn't think I was going to be anything to, the accolades that I've picked up along the way. I think it's testament that no human being should be defined by their circumstance. And it's very easy to forget that. It's very easy to be warped into our circumstances and have that be an indication of who we are and the value that we bring. And if that gets taken away, we lose our identity. So for me, my journey to the rebuilding, I had to go sober for 6 years, completely sober, cold turkey, waking up at 3 a.m. every morning. I've documented some of this stuff on YouTube. But waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, going through prayer, meditation, and then doing my exercises before I started my day, I really had to come back to myself and understand, who is this thing that's existing in this space and time? And why do I wait on people to validate me in my existence? And I had to go through all these processes and questions. But with that being said, the 3 standout, processes or steps that I took through rebuilding myself from the setback, the first one was compassion and forgiveness, compassion, forgiveness. And that's letting myself off the hook. And I think it's very important when you go through a setback, you've got to have compassion for yourself first and foremost. Compassion, letting yourself off the hook, because you got to understand you were who you were. You knew what you knew, and that's it. You couldn't have known anything more. That's what you were in that given time. You were the accumulation and the result from the build-up before those circumstances. So there was nothing else you could have done and said. There's always this idea of when you look back on your life in hindsight, you always know exactly what should have happened. But that's actually, a very dangerous place to be, because obviously, again, away from circumstances, everybody's a genius. But when you're caught up in it, you are who you are in that moment. And so it's very important to have compassion or forgiveness for yourself, to say, that's all I was, that's all I knew, and that's all I could have done. That was my greatest strength. If I'm looking back and I say I could have done better, no, you couldn't have. Because if you could have, you would have. And I had really had to say that to myself. Could I have, done more push-ups? Could I have done more runs? Could I have done this? Should I have done that? No, that's who I was in that moment. I was the result of my environment and circumstances, and my knowledge. That's what it was. So I've got to let myself off the hook. I've got to love myself, to forgive myself, and say that's what it was. And so, rule number 1, or step number 1, I should say, is let yourself off the hook. Give yourself some forgiveness. And if you're one of those people, if it's somebody else's fault bestowed upon you, if they've done you wrong, have some compassion or forgiveness for them as well, because that's all they know themselves to be, to you and for you. So compassion is definitely step number 1, allowing yourself to detach from that circumstance. That's all the narratives that are attached to it. It is what it is, and that's what it was. Moving on. Step number 2, audit yourself. Now, for those of you who don't know what auditing is, example we want to use, a restaurant, all right? If you have a restaurant, you're going to get auditors coming through, and they're going to audit the place. They're going to look at the place and see, is this place, worthy of being run? Is it safe? Is there hygiene up to standards, et cetera, et cetera? They're looking for things that they want to tick the boxes so that you can continue being a progressive restaurant or a business and continue running, up to standard. So when you audit yourself, have a look at the fundamentals that are within you. And there's 3 things you want to audit within yourself. The first one is how you speak about yourself. The conversation about yourself to yourself. What does that sound like? Often I always say this, the easiest conversation you will ever have is one about yourself to others. But what does the conversation about you to you sound like? This is ultimately the foundation of who you are, how you talk about yourself to yourself, especially when you're exposed to new environments, unknown environments, when things get a little bit hard. What does that conversation about you to you sound like? And that will indicate ultimately how you're going to perform in those areas. The second element when you're auditing yourself is, what are your values or value? If you can't name more than one value, just stick to one. You don't need 26. So just start with one and really identify that value and how you operate from that value. Your value is something that helps you drive through life. It gives meaning to doing what you do. For me, my value was I had to take care of my health first and foremost, and I had to take care of my mind and the noise that was in my head. So waking up at 3 a.m. was the best way I could take care of myself first before I meet the world and its noise. So identifying your value. And the third, key point when auditing yourself is, how often do you compromise yourself, and what does it take? When compromising yourself, what I mean by that is, when you've set yourself out on a journey or a quest to a desirable outcome, what does it take for you to compromise yourself? If you're doing a 6-week challenge, or if you're cutting out alcohol for the year, what does it take for you to go against your own word? Really audit yourself on this one, because life has a funny way of presenting all these enticing and temptations around us. And if you're not careful and instilled within yourself, you're going to play the game of life, forever being pulled left, right, and center with beliefs and, all these narratives. And then ultimately you become a slave of the game. So really identify within yourself, what does it take for you to compromise? If you've cut out alcohol, how is it that you go back to the alcohol when your friends propose it to you? So those are the three things: auditing yourself, your conversation about yourself, how you speak about yourself, what does that sound like? What is your value or your values? And ultimately, what does it take to compromise yourself? So audit yourself in those areas, and that's number 2. And number 3 is reprogramming yourself. The result of the person that you are right now is highly influenced from the environments that you've been exposed to and the feedback, the round of applause, the acceptance into the community that you're involved with. All these things play a role in how you perceive yourself. Ultimately, some of us show up differently to different environments because we know the expectations of how we have to be in those environments. Something I want to slide in there is, what does that mean for you? Does it mean that you're actually showing up as who you are? Are you experiencing your existence in those moments? Something to think about. But yeah, reprogramming yourself, how you think, how you talk, all these elements, highly influenced by environments and circumstances that you've been in. When we talk about what you consume, ultimately we're talking about your information, the information that you're taking in, those TV shows, the music you're listening to. All these things are information. And we look at the word itself, information. You're being formed on the inside. So your perception is being formed by the environments that you're in, the music that you listen to, the TV shows you're watching, the gossip that you're amongst. All these elements are forming you on the inside. That's what we call it, information. Now, the question is, what information is programming you right now? How is it affecting your concept on love, relationship, forgiveness, values, boundaries, all these elements that should be instilled within us? How is all these consumptions of information in your environment affecting the way you perceive yourself now? And is it time to change? Is it time to reprogram? Is it time to ignore the TV shows, ignore the gossip, put down the drink, start your exercises? Time to reprogram yourself. So those are my 3 steps that I took, guys. Compassion, really forgiving myself. I couldn't have done anything more back then. I mean, I could sit here and say I should have done this, could have done that, but I didn't. That's who I was. That's all I knew. So compassion. Audit yourself. Number 2, go inside and say, hey man, this has got to go. These elements about me, these habits, they've got to disappear, because, they say that, the outcome of your life is not indicated by what you want. It's usually influenced by the habits that you're committed to, and that will ultimately determine the outcome of your life. So yeah, audit yourself, number 2. And number 3, reprogram yourself. Watch that information that you're taking in, the environments that you're in, the TV shows, the music, the social medias, etc., etc. What are you taking in? Because it's programming who you're becoming. Now, with that being said, it's very easy to sit here and just blubber away and talk about my journey and what I've learned. But I think it's also important to hear other people's, theories and food for thoughts, if you will. So I'm going to call a friend of mine, and I just want to hear her take, and she's going to remain anonymous. I hope she answers. And just to hear her take on rebuilding.
Hello,
superstar. How are you?
I'm really good. How are you doing?
I'm very, 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 very good.
Oh, this is awesome.
Listen, I wanted to ask you a question. I'm doing a potty right now. The subject is rebuilding self from setback, and I've just talked about my 3-step process,
yes.
Rebuilding. And mine was first is compassion with self. Second is auditing myself. And then third is reprogramming myself. So really it's about, the working on self. But, I've spoken enough about me. But I just wanted to throw the ball in your court, and I'm sure you're just like the rest of 99% of the human race. You've had your fair share of setbacks and having to rebuild yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think we all have a story, but yeah, I definitely have experienced that as well. I think the biggest setbacks for me is going through a potentially terminal illness, going through a divorce, quitting my career, and this all happened at the same time. So it's something that's very close to my heart, and I actually really love talking about it. So I'm glad you've got me on to just have a chat about it, because resilience is a big thing in today's world, and it's not always what you think it is. It's not always just sticking in there.
Right.
I think sticking in there is great, but sticking in there in the same way that you always have is not good. I think one of the biggest things that kind of got me through was, first of all, I would say, is allowing everything to fall apart.
Wow.
And that's okay.
Wow.
It's okay to let the pieces fall, which I think for someone who is productive, useful, builds their identity on their usefulness, or just, really being out there doing things, that's a really hard thing to do.
Right.
Yeah, to let the pieces fall.
Absolutely.
And then, so I think that's it's okay. And it's it feels counterproductive, and it's just scary. You think you'll never come back from letting go.
Right.
So I think that's really the first step to the process, and then that way you can kind of then pick up the pieces that you really want to take with you, the value, and then remold yourself from there.
Wow. And along the journey to rebuilding yourself, what does the conversation sound like to yourself?
Oh, the good ones or the bad ones?
Well, I mean, if we're gonna be real, it's not always gonna be, we're not gonna be on cloud 9 towards rebuilding ourselves. Yeah, is there some, both good and bad? What are the conversations? Yeah,
there's definitely good and bad conversations, and when you're in the bad ones because you're just in the midst of it all,
Right.
But I think you really have to fight for yourself and who that you're supposed to be.
Right.
Oof. Who that you really are. Sometimes I was like, okay, this is really bad, but I know I'm just in a mood and I'm just dealing. I'm just in the midst of dealing, and that's normal to be here. But then to still have the desire to want to be out of a different place, and realize, okay, what tools can I use to progress me out of this mindset?
Wow.
That's not serving me.
Right.
And sometimes it's really hard starting at basic, but basic is the best place to start.
Amen.
Basic is the best place to start, and just being patient with yourself to start at the lowest level. So what I mean by that was that I would wake up and be grateful for the day.
Yeah.
And just be like, wow, the clouds are beautiful. I love that. Just being grateful for oh my God, the water on my back in the shower. Like, oh my gosh, I can breathe. Like just the things that just you skip past all the time.
Yes, yeah.
Ended up being something that was really pivotal for me, a pivotal change, giving myself some space to be present.
I love that.
Was massive. It was a massive game changer for me, So I really learned I had to learn how to be present, because you don't realize how much of your brain is so far ahead of you, or like milling on the past.
Yeah.
It's like the majority of your day is those two things.
Wow.
So actually learning the skill of that. I obviously haven't nailed it, but it makes you more conscious that that's where you live.
Yeah.
Leave it there.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was. Yeah. I think that was a huge game changer for me, because I started to appreciate from the inside out. And
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And would you say that played a role in developing a stronger relationship with yourself?
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Yeah, 100%, because you get to know yourself again, a completely new way,
Yeah.
You kind of let go of all the expectations, all the shoulda, coulda, woulda, your own striving. You don't realize how much you were striving to make something happen.
Amen.
And I think you become more authentic through that process. You become more authentic, you become more real. And that's gold going forward in your life.
Amen.
You become people pleaser. There's so many things to take away from going through those valleys.
Yeah.
That is absolute gold, I think. Now when you look back, you're like, wow, I needed that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel the same way?
Well, it's funny you've actually just repeated some of the stuff I was discussing.
Oh, cool.
And it validates what I said. So I feel like I've been hugged.
Oh, big hug.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's sensational. And, and with this journey, and no doubt someone listening is probably thinking, well, it sounds all good and well. You've done it and I'm still stuck here. And, sometimes we need a bit of words of encouragement or call to action or something from someone who's gone through it. If you could give, some words of encouragement or words of wisdom, what would you say to someone who's in that moment right now?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, I think.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to hear when you're there is cliches.
Yes. Yeah.
The last thing you want to hear when you're there is like, oh yeah, there's a silver lining on every cloud.
Yeah.
Your life is great. Not great. But I think the best advice that I would give is that you know that you want a better life. You know that you want more, and you know that you want things to count. That's why this hurts so bad, because you want your life to count.
Amen.
And by the grace of God, because I'm a woman of faith,
Amen.
I believe that my life counts. But it's something that I had to be shown that my life counts. And sometimes everything's got to strip away for that to happen. So you're not leaning on your career, you're not leaning on your husband, you're not leaning on your health, you're not leaning on your friends. And sometimes those things strip away for you to realize that you really, really matter just on your own. So I think, that's something that I would say, like, hold on to the fact that you know that you matter, because no one matters more than you. Like, if the person next to you, they don't matter more than you do. You matter the same.
Right.
They've been given life, you've been given life, you're on the same thing. So hold on to that value in yourself. Hold on to that, like, it might not feel like I count right now, but it's going to count. And probably what I'm going through right now is going to even speak loudly when I get through this.
Ooh.
Come
Amen.
on. Come on.
Come on. Come on. Yes.
Yeah.
Sis, you are a super legend. And, I truly hope, these words land on somebody out there. And,
Yeah, I hope so too, because that's why sometimes we go through what we go through, because it's also for someone else.
Amen. Amen.
Other people. So I hope the same thing, that people take a hold of what we're speaking about and get encouraged from your experience and my experience and other people around them, and just keep taking the next step.
Amen. Oh, wow. Well, sis, I'll let you go. And speaking of steps, I'll let you continue taking your steps. But we'll talk soon, yeah?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for the call, Gibbs.
Amen. No, God bless, yeah?
Talk to you soon.
Amen.
Bye.
Bye. Wow. I mean, there is so much gold nuggets to take away from that. One that stood out for me was definitely, in relation to stripping away everything. Not identifying yourself to your job, your career, all these, going back to the bare minimum and appreciating the small things like the water running down your back. I mean, sis couldn't have said it any better. And I think that's what it does. It comes down to. And the second thing she said that really stood out for me, and it hit home, was that the pain that you're feeling, it's actually a part of you saying that you deserve more, but you're not experiencing it. And that's what breeds the frustration, the sadness. A part of you knows you are more, but you're not experiencing the moreness. You're experiencing something that contradicts what a part of you wants to experience. And I know that's enough to tell everybody and anybody that there's hope. Don't give up on yourself. Go through the setback, experience the setback, experience the emotional evoking of what's taking place. But don't give up. Don't let these circumstances define you. Hang in there. If my steps can help, compassion, forgive yourself for what you didn't know and what you could have done better. You were who you were, but you're not that person anymore. Audit yourself, go through within yourself and see what habits and commitments that sort of are going to remind you to go back to what it used to be, whether it's the way you talk, walk, music, whatever it is. Maybe you need to change some elements about yourself so that you can complement yourself into a new environment. And last but not least, reprogram yourself. What are you consuming right now? What's contributing to how you're going to perceive yourself in the end? I truly believe that no human being should be defined by the circumstance. And that's what the food for thought today is, guys. At any moment you can rebuild yourself. But above all else, what I want you to take away is this, a reminder that you are more than what you have become. You are more than what happens to you.